The HYUNDAI i20 has evolved in second-generation guise. No longer merely a budget choice, it now has the quality, the efficiency, the technology and the looks to square up against the Super Mini class leaders. Plus, it's still got one of the best after-sales packages anywhere in the car industry, and pricing hasn't got too ambitious. In other words, if you're shopping in this segment, here's a car you shouldn't leave off your shortlist. We're used to hearing success stories from HYUNDAI, but in recent years there's one important market segment this Korean company has found something of a struggle. That for super minis. Quite simply, it's never built one that could go head-to-head with the class best. That, though, was exactly the aim with this car, the second-generation i20. As its name suggests, the i20 slots neatly in between HYUNDAI's i10 city car and i30 family hatchback, both impressive but sometimes rather forgotten contenders in their respective sectors. You can make the same observation about this i20, for apart from a brief sales spurt following an original launch in 2009 that was boosted by interest generated by the government's short-lived scrappage scheme, it had become a rather forgotten choice in the Super Mini segment before the arrival of this Mark II model in early 2015. This car, though, should change things, delivering what the importers claim to be a class-leading value proposition. That may be so, but this time round the i20 needs to sell on more than just value. Buyers in this segment are now demanding extra style, technology and driving satisfaction, and they tend to favour products created with the European market in mind. HYUNDAI told us that the first-generation version of this car was developed that way, but in reality it was built in India on budget principles very much related to the company's past. This Mark II design is very different, with production transferred to a state-of-the-art plant in Turkey, following a German-based product development programme and a demanding testing schedule on roads right across the Eurozone. This one, in other words, really is designed precisely for us. You can see that in the way it looks, in the sophistication it offers and in the efficiency that lies beneath the bonnet. There's even a separate coupe version that aims to particularly highlight driving dynamics the Korean company also claims are much improved. Will it all be enough to worry the class-leading credentials of cars like Ford's Fiesta, Peugeot's 208 and Volkswagen's Polo? Let's find out. Here's a question for you. It might seem a bit facetious, but think about it for a moment. Does it really matter how a HYUNDAI i20 drives? You might think not. After all, until the launch of the second-generation version of this car, typical buyers tended to choose an i20 for its economy, its warranty, and if we're being totally honest, because it was a cheap, safe, worry-free purchase, and they weren't really that interested in cars. The Korean brand could have carried on satisfying these undemanding folk this time round too, but that would have been a dangerous strategy. The cheap Chinese brands that'll soon be with us, and Dacia, who already are, can make super minis of that kind an awful lot more cheaply than HYUNDAI can sell them. In other words, with this Mark II model i20, this Korean maker simply had to take a big step forward. If it was going to price the thing against Fiestas, Corsas and Clios in this segment, it had to deliver driving dynamics to match the impressive class standard. Dull to drive, but hey, look what you're paying, was no longer going to cut it. Things had to change this time around. At first glance at what's on offer here, though, you might wonder whether they have. Whereas most other major Super Mini players offer a huge range of petrol and diesel engines with a broad choice of transmissions and a sassy sports model or two at the top of the range to bolster the appeal, HYUNDAI hasn't done that. To be honest, it's a bit of a puzzle why. After all, you have to wonder what the point is of campaigning an i20 in the World Rally Championship and then squandering all of that expenditure by failing to sell a really quick, sporty version. The Korean maker would probably argue in response that its priorities have been focused in other, more important areas, primarily in trying to catch up with and match the high-tech, new-generation three-cylinder turbo petrol technology that's given brands like Ford, Vauxhall and Peugeot such an advantage in this class. It's done just that with its 1-litre TGDI unit, which matches the efficiency of its rivals while delivering a little more potency, with 120 PS of power and 172 Newton-meters of torque. This is the engine to have in this car if you can stretch towards a top-of-the-range version. The problem is, though, that very few customers will be looking to do that. Most i20s are sold from the bottom end of the lineup, and if that's where you're looking to buy, then you'll need to be satisfied with a less cutting-edge selection of engines that have largely been carried over from the first generation model, though updated to meet Euro 6 emission standards. Now, in terms of petrol power, that means a 1.2-litre Kappa unit, whose age can be gauged from the fact that you have to stir it into action via a manual gearbox that gives you just 5 speeds. Many Super Minis, though, use older engine technology in more affordable variants. The old nails that you get at the foot of the Corsa or Fiesta ranges are a lot worse than this. 1.2-litre i20 motoring comes in either 75 PS guise or, as here, with 84 PS, and performance doesn't differ greatly either way. The base model gets to 62 miles an hour from rest in 13.6 seconds on the way to 99 miles an hour. Figures the more powerful variant I'm trying here improves on by a negligible half a second and 7 miles an hour. At the launch of this second generation model, Hyundai also offered its conventional Kappa technology in 1.4-litre 100 PS form, in which guys an i20 can make 62 miles an hour in 11.6 seconds en route to 114 miles an hour. Or at least it can with 6-speed manual transmission. A lethargic 4-speed automatic is also available as an option at this level. Both these 4-cylinder petrol engines are lightly endowed with torque, so struggle a little on the open road when the car's fully loaded up. For a stronger showing in this regard, you'd be better off choosing one of the CRDI diesels. Possibly the 75 PS 1.1-litre unit, though the performance here really is quite leisurely, 62 miles an hour from rest, occupying 16 seconds on the way to a 2-figure maximum. It's better, if you can, to find the small premium Hyundai asks for the 90 PS 1.4-litre CRDI variant, which delivers a far more acceptable set of stats: 62 miles an hour in 12.1 seconds en route to 109 miles an hour, and more importantly 240 Newton-meters of torque, so double the pulling power you get from the 1.2-litre petrol model that I'm trying here. You notice the difference, especially in town, where with the diesel there's less need to row the car along with the gear lever. Enough on the engines, though before leaving this subject, we will make one more important point. You struggle to hear them. Offhand, it's hard to think of a Super Mini in this segment that's better than this one in suppressing noise, vibration and harshness. Talk to the development team behind this car and they'll bore you for hours with detail on sound deadening material placement, anti-noise pads and the way that the low-frequency pad behind the dashboard reduces vibration throughout the cabin. The sleeker shape plays its part here too. The bottom line is that all the effort has handsomely paid off, which is one of the things that makes this one of the few Super Minis in which you'd feel confident in undertaking a really long trip. The revised suspension setup helps here too. The improved shock absorber valve system enabling the somewhat nervous ride quality of the first generation i20 model to be replaced here by a more grown-up, supple feel. To be honest, it feels better at faster speeds than it does at slower ones. We've already talked about motorway composure, but it's not bad on back roads either. Turn hard into a series of corners, and in terms of grip, body roll and traction, it's a different world from the dynamic repertoire that was served up by the original version of this car. A massive 81% increase in torsional rigidity helps here, and the end result is that you might even end up enjoying yourself. Move into what ought to be this Hyundai's urban comfort zone and things aren't quite as impressive. Sharp ridges or expansion joints can send a noticeable thump into the cabin, which isn't ideal in town, though points here are clawed back by the slick and precise gear change action, the tight turning circle, and the excellent forward visibility enabled by these slimmer front A-pillars. It also helps in this environment that the steering is light and direct. The wheel at each corner design makes each extremity of the car easy to position, and its simplicity itself to park, just as a Super Mini should be. The Korean brand calls the design of this car a study in elegant simplicity. Now, we're not sure we'd call it that, but there's no doubt that this time around, the looks of this i20 give the car a bit more personality. Here we've got the volume-selling 5-door version, but Hyundai is also offering a 3-door coupe model that's got a bolder rear wheel arch design and a very slick rear C-pillar, smart touches that create quite a desirable shape. This 5-door version can't quite match that, of course, but Hyundai's usual fluidic sculpture design theme has brought with it confident curves, a low, wide stance, and a sloping roofline that gives the whole shape a bit of energy. I particularly like the way these wheel arches subtly flow into the long bonnet, and this distinctive dual element front grille works well too. It's thin and horizontal at the top, connecting the bifunction headlights and emphasising the width of the car. Further down, in contrast, you get this more overt trapezoidal section that's deliberately low to the ground and uprightly hexagonal in shape. Move round to the side and you might more readily appreciate just how much bigger this design is. 40mm longer and 24mm wider than its predecessor. It's lower too, sitting 16mm closer to the ground, another of the things that gives this car a little more attitude. Up front, there are thinner A-pillars, while if you follow this prominent feature line to the rear of the car, you pick out these gloss black C-pillars, there to create a smart floating roof effect. They wrap around the rear corner into a tailgate dominated by these boomerang-style lamp clusters that for once don't feature reversing lights, these having been located to a rather more vulnerable position on the rear bumper. Lift the hatch and you're greeted with one of the most accommodating luggage areas in the segment. Capacity having increased by 10% with this Mark II model to a class-leading 326 litres in this 5-door variant. Now, to give you some perspective, that's 40 litres more than you get in a Fiesta, 45 litres more than you get in a Corsa, and 50 litres more than is offered by a Volkswagen Polo. This also, incidentally, is a larger cargo area than you'd get from a Ford Focus in the next class up. The 1027mm wide opening is one of the broadest in the segment, and most i20 models also add flexibility into the mix by providing a useful 2-stage luggage floorboard that can be moved up or down to provide additional storage options. I'd want the optional boot liner too to keep the floor clean. If you need more space, then pushing forward the split-folding rear bench frees up 1,042 litres of it, helped by the fact that the created cargo area is almost completely flat. Move to the rear seat, and space remains a strong point. Those familiar with the previous generation version of this car will appreciate the additional room freed up by 45mm of extra wheelbase length this time round. Now, we'd worried that the sleeker lower lines would mean compromises in headroom, but in fact, there's a little more than there was before, along with 24mm more room in which to stretch your legs, 6mm more room for your hips, and 15mm more space for your shoulders. The result is a cabin almost as big as that you'd find in a Focus-sized C-segment car in the next class up. Hyundai reckons it's all enough to make the i20 a genuine 5-seater. And we're not sure we go that far, but there's no doubt that the wider body shell makes this model more inviting for rear seat folk than most of its rivals. The door pockets are usefully large too, able to take a 1-litre bottle of water. It's quite pleasant up front too, where a two-tone colour scheme adds a bit of character to what might otherwise be a rather featureless design. Depending on the exterior paintwork you've chosen, this upper section can come either in beige, a dark grey, a cappuccino brown, or in the grey-blue shade that I have here. All of these finishes smartly set off by an intuitively laid out dash that features what Hyundai calls functional clustering of the key technologies, a grouping together of key instrumentation items like the audio, heating and ventilation systems to create a cleaner looking fascia. With the exception of a few minor switches hidden away here by the driver's right knee, it all works really well, and the materials used are edging towards the top of the Super Mini class. The finishing touches applied with piano black inlays and splashes of chrome. Perhaps the biggest talking point is what's missing. Almost every Super Mini these days comes packaged with a touchscreen infotainment system. Though Hyundai also provides this at the top of the range, the brand has decided that mainstream versions like this one can do without this fashionable feature. Buyers may disagree. The brand hopes that those that do can instead be satisfied by the option of a smartphone dock that clips on in rather aftermarket style here on top of the dash. More thoughtfully incorporated are the redesigned air vents, which neatly overhang the dashboard into the doors and have been shaped to provide better airflow around the cabin. On to the day-to-day practicalities of living with this car, which have been as well thought through as you would expect. The asymmetric dash has been positioned a little higher and further forward than it was in the previous generation version of this car, and that's led to front legroom increases the front seat passenger may particularly appreciate. For the driver, there's plenty of adjustment for the steering wheel and for the seat, although the backrest angle is unfortunately altered with a lever rather than a more precise rotary dial. Even so, it's easy to find a commanding perch, and the instruments viewed through the three-spoke multifunction wheel are a model of clarity. There's decent over-the-shoulder vision, while up ahead, the thinner front A-pillars I mentioned earlier give you a wider view when negotiating roundabouts and junctions. And there's plenty of oddment stowage space scattered around the cabin too. That means these big cup holders, also a usefully sized centre console box, an air-conditioned glove box, this sunglasses holder up here, and decently sized door pockets that are large enough to swallow 1.5 litre bottles. It's all very well thought through. You might expect a much improved product to command a much higher price. And true enough, the second generation version of this car isn't quite the bargain its predecessor was. It still sits very much at the value end of the Super Mini spectrum though. Yes, you could pay £17,000 or more for one, but the sticker prices for the mainstream 5-door range actually start at under £11,000 for petrol power, or from around £12,500 if you want a diesel. Sounds affordable, doesn't it? This time round, Hyundai has separately positioned the 3-door body style as a model in its own right, giving it a sportier look, calling it a coupe, and selling it at prices fractionally higher than those being asked for equivalent 5-door variants. It'll be interesting to see how buyers take to that. So, how do those kinds of figures stack up against obvious rivals? First, let's consider how this Korean contender's proposition compares to that of the two Super Mini market leaders, Ford's Fiesta and Vauxhall's Corsa. Pretty well is the answer. True, in a base petrol i20, the 1.2-litre 75 PS variant, you do get one of Hyundai's older engines, but then that's also true at this level in the kind of directly comparable Fiesta 1.25-litre 82 PS or Corsa 1.2i 85 PS 5-door models that list at around £2,000 or so more. Further up the range, the i20 maintains its advantage against these two key competitors. Its clever 1-litre TGDI petrol engine can offer you more power for less money than the base versions of Ford and Vauxhall's equivalent high-tech 1-litre units. And the Korean brand's 1.1 and 1.4-litre CRDI diesels can generally undercut black pump-fuelled Fiesta and Corsa direct rivals by £1,500 to £2,000. Look away from the obvious alternative Super Mini choices and the i20 puts up an equally strong showing. You'd expect it to cost the same sort of money as its cousin, the Kia Rio, and it does. The two Korean cars do, after all, share the same engines and much of the same technology under the skin. Otherwise, though, there's not much in this sector that can match the value proposition on offer here, unless you choose a real bargain basement brand option like Dacia's Sandero or the MG3. Do that and you'll have to accept lower standards of build quality and technology, plus residual values that could decimate much of your upfront saving when the time comes to sell. Otherwise, just about everything else you could consider in the Super Mini segment is pricier. Yes, even cars from makers whose products you'd think might be quite affordable. Make model-for-model comparisons against contenders like Seat's Ibiza and Skoda's Fabia, and in many cases you could see the equivalent i20 variant saving you £1,000 or so, which is quite a lot in this part of the market. It's the same story if you compare against a Toyota Yaris. And if you were to look at more premium Super Minis, cars like Honda's Jazz, Volkswagen's Polo and the Mazda 2, that model-for-model difference might stretch out as far as £1,500 or so. In fact, if you're really serious about trying to match this car's technology and value proposition, you'd probably be better turning to a French alternative. Equivalent Renault Clio and Peugeot 208 models aren't priced far away from the money being asked for a comparable i20. But even here, the better-equipped HYUNDAI still holds a slight advantage. I mentioned equipment. If, having considered all of this, you conclude that it is an i20 that you really want, then you're going to need to know about this car's standard specification. At the foot of the range, it's frankly not too much to write home about, but then that's also the case with entry-level versions of all obvious rivals. Here, with a baseline S-spec i20, you get daytime running lights, front electric windows, tinted glass, electrically adjustable and heated door mirrors, a perimeter alarm, a trip computer, a height-adjustable driver's seat, and USB and aux-in connections for the fairly feeble two-speaker stereo. There's no spare wheel, though, just a can of mobility foam. You can do better than this, and your HYUNDAI dealer will doubtless bend over backwards to try and make this possible. Most looking at an i20S model will want to pay the relatively affordable extra premium to get themselves air conditioning that also cools the glove box. But once you've done that, then you might as well start to think about negotiating yourself into a version of this car with the trim level that almost all buyers go for, SE. I have a car of that sort here, and having tried it, can see the appeal, for you get a lot more for your money at this level. As well as that air-conditioned cabin, there's a much better quality 4-speaker stereo with audio controls on the steering wheel. Plus, there's Bluetooth connectivity with voice recognition. You also get front fog lights, rear parking sensors, cruise control, power windows all round, a bit of leather trim for the steering wheel and gear shifter, a useful variable height boot floor, and a proper space-saver rear wheel you'll be glad of should you ever get stranded by the roadside. The other advantage of buying in at SE level is that this spec also gives you the option of ticking the box for the optional driver assist pack that your salesperson will be keen to tell you about. This gives you a suite of high-tech lighting features, halogen projector headlamps that turn with the corners, plus piercing LEDs for the daytime running lights. The key inclusion, though, is a neat smartphone docking station that sits on top of the dash to ensure that your phone is at hand in your line of sight and charged at all times. Having this will be especially handy if you've downloaded navigation apps onto your handset. Otherwise, for navigation, you've to stretch to the priciest premium nav trim levels that include a 7-inch touchscreen infotainment system, which includes a DAB radio and a rear-view camera. Other niceties predictably positioned at or near the very top of the range include a beautiful full-length opening panoramic glass roof, climate control with an automatic demist function for the windscreen, auto headlamps and wipers, and the option of heating both for the front seats and for the steering wheel. The fact that you can even have leather seats is another pointer to this model's subtle but significant shift up market. On to safety, another area Hyundai's keen to talk about, thanks to the high-strength steel technology used in this car's stronger chassis and body shell, something that's helped this model to a 5-star Euro NCAP crash test rating. Some Super Mini makers force you to pay extra for things like stability control and extra airbags at entry level, but this Korean brand doesn't, offering twin front, side and curtain bags and stability control on every variant, the latter feature included as part of this i20's clever VSM, Vehicle Stability Management setup. It's a system that'll stabilise the car if one side of it has more traction than the other, say if there's ice, standing water or wet leaves at the side of the road. Other safety features fitted across the board include ISOFIX child seat fastenings, tyre pressure monitoring, anti-whiplash head restraints and HAC hill start assist control to stop you from drifting backwards on uphill junctions. You also get the usual electronic assistance for a braking system that aids you in panic stops, advertised to following motorists by an ESS emergency stop signal setup that flashes the hazard lights when you slam on the anchors. Avoid the entry trim level and you also get a lane departure warning system that stops dozy drivers veering out of their lanes on the highway. The 5-year unlimited mileage warranty used to be one of the main reasons for buying a Hyundai. Today, of course, there are other attractions, but the warranty is still one of the best in the business and helps boost the residual values of your car. Imagine you bought a Hyundai i20 and your neighbour bought a Fiesta, and you both sell your cars after 3 years. Anyone buying the Ford would be on their own as a second-hand user, whereas the Hyundai buyer would be able to transfer the residual 2 years of the warranty. That's a huge draw card. As well as the warranty, Hyundai also offers annual health checks on the i20 for 5 years and 5 years worth of roadside assistance. There's an additional 10-year anti-perforation warranty for the bodywork. You can also choose a 3 or 5 year fixed price servicing plan if you really want to take the nasty surprises out of ownership. None of which would matter much if day-to-day running costs weren't to be up to scratch. Fortunately, Hyundai seems to have done just enough here to keep up, primarily in developing its own 3-cylinder turbo petrol unit, badged as the 1-litre TGDI, to rival those engines of similar configuration provided by key rivals like the Ford Fiesta, the Vauxhall Corsa and the Peugeot 208. If you're buying an i20 and can stretch towards the top of the range, variants with this engine fitted really are the ones to have. With 120 PS on tap, this unit offers a little more power than most of its direct rivals, yet can offer the potential of regular 65 miles to the gallon combined cycle fuel economy, matched with a CO2 return pitched in at around the 100 grams per kilometre mark. The i20's older mainstream petrol units can't match that, of course. From launch, a redeveloped 1.4-litre 100 PS unit was offered, this delivering unremarkable returns, 51.4 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 127 grams per kilometre of CO2. The main purpose of this variant was to offer the lineup's only automatic model, though opting for this has big impacts on running costs, the figures plummeting to 42.2 miles to the gallon and 155 grams per kilometre. That leaves only the entry-level Euro 6 compatible 1.2-litre petrol unit most i20 buyers choose. In terms of efficiency, 1.2-litre petrol-powered i20 motoring gives you the choice of either a lower-powered 75 PS model that manages a 58.9 miles to the gallon combined cycle showing, along with emissions of 112 grams per kilometre, or an 84 PS version which delivers 55.4 miles to the gallon and 119 grams per kilometre. That's some way off the figures delivered by the kind of newer technology you'll find in comparable four-cylinder rivals like Renault's Clio 1.2 TCE or the 1.2-litre TSI unit used in a Polo or a Skoda Fabia. But a 1.2-litre i20 is able to marginally better the kind of returns you get from the older petrol units you'll find in an entry-level Fiesta or Vauxhall Corsa. On to diesel power, which you won't be surprised to learn is the cleanest and most economic way to run an i20. Go for the eco-orientated 75 PS 1.1 litre CRDI Blue variant, and thanks to low rolling resistance tyres and a stop-start system, this car's right up there with the class leaders, delivering 88.3 miles to the gallon and 84 grams per kilometre of CO2. The standard 1.1 litre CRDI i20 model can't quite match this, of course, but it still delivers 70.6 miles to the gallon and 103 grams per kilometre. If you need a little more punch, there's a 90 PS 1.4 litre CRDI variant that manages 68.9 miles to the gallon and 106 grams per kilometre of CO2. What else? Insurance groupings? Well, they should be affordable. Let's start with the petrol models. You'll be rated at Group 5E for the 1.2 75 PS version, Group 6 or 7E for the 1.2 84 PS variant, and Group 10E for the 1.4 100 PS derivative. If you're looking at a CRDI diesel, base your calculations on Group 6E for the 1.1, while if you want the 1.4, you'll be rated at either 11 or 12E. Servicing shouldn't set you back too much either, as consumables like brake pads and tyres tend to be cheap. Plus, engines like the 1.4 litre petrol unit feature a maintenance-free long-life timing chain. Finally, residual values should stand up very well, with recent history suggesting that after the usual 3-year ownership period, you'll get around 48% of the initial purchase price back. One statistic tells you a lot about this i20. 88% of existing owners buy another, a figure almost double that of typical rivals in this segment. Evidently then, people like it once they've tried it. You can see why. Certainly it's hard to think of a Super Mini that would be easier to live with than this one. Few others are more practical or better built, and though pricing's crept up a little, this car remains affordable to buy. To these sensible virtues, this second-generation model adds a sleeker shape, a more willing set of driving dynamics, and most of the high-tech features you'd now expect from a modern contender in this class. Of course, it isn't perfect. Not all the mainstream engines are as efficient as they could be, a point emphasised by some trendier, more avant-garde rivals, some of which are better to drive. Overall, though, if you can find a car in this class that makes more sense when you add together all the really important attributes that families look for in a Super Mini in this segment, then you'll be doing very well. These are, after all, times that more than ever call for sensible decisions. Like purchase of an i20? If your target market for this car, you might well think so.